Well, good morning and welcome to the Amptech Services workshop this Christmas. As is traditional, I'm going to be putting together a little video for your interest, which on this occasion is a little bit about amp servicing. Fairly not going in too deep in this, really, just taking a look at the kind of things that are done to service your amp when it comes in here. So on the bench we have, all the way from Studio 5A, a Marshall Valvestate AVT50 or AVT2000. Very confusing the way that Marshall mark up their equipment with different names and different numbers. But this is one of the kind of base model pretty much of the Valvestate range. Not quite, but it's getting there. But this one does actually have a valve because one or two of them don't, which is rather interesting, from Marshall. So this one, as you can see, is already work in progress, and I've already taken the main PCB out. The problem with this is there was no audio from it, although it did power up. So on further investigation, this amp gets a lot of use. It's in their rehearsal. It's used for rehearsal a lot, so everybody uses it. Usual use and abuse that all these amps get, to be expected. Certainly that was my experience when I was running a rehearsal studio over in on the mainland, and so this is quite a good example of the kind of things that you find. Usual thing, really. They get very dusty, collect a lot of dust. Little bit of corrosion over time. Most amps get that, and the jack sockets and all the bits that we interface with, obviously, you know, they take quite a hammering, and this one is actually no exception. And already I've changed the input jack socket because that was not too bad, but since it's out, it's worth doing. Otherwise, it's going to be back. So I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't change that. But the main issue was this fella here, which is a stereo jack which sits on the headphone output, which the audio actually flows across these shorting contacts. And in this case, it had lost its earth to the speaker, hence no audio. And if you look, you can see that contact there is very tarnished, and is actually very high resistance. So that's not going to work. So that's being replaced. I had those in stock, but I'd run out of these. Don't use the stereo ones so much, but they should actually be here today by UPS. So that being the case, they arrived this morning. I'll slot those in. The other thing that happened to it as well, this resistor here was burnt, and that's because it's actually on the output before the jack socket, and with no speaker connected, it took more than its fair share of power across it. That goes from, there's a capacitor that goes down to earth, to deck on that as well. Such is the way that it's got a chip on the output. It's a TDA chip, TDA 7293 for those that are interested, and they need certain conditions to be satisfied for them to work properly, and one of them is this resistor and a capacitor down to deck. But if the speaker isn't there, I would assume that it's just conducted too much and has actually got very hot, although it actually is still working. So if we look, that one in centre shot there is what I've replaced it with. It's a 1/2 watt resistor. So that is done. Also in this amplifier you have, oh look, it's a Valvestate with a valve. And that's almost certainly going to be the original valve, Marshall valve, although it's not Marshall, it's going to be Russian, or looking at that, possibly a Sovtech, I think. So there's a Sovtech valve there, which has already been sorted out on the tester. I will go through that again at another time. I have actually done that before years ago, but I'll talk to you again about valve testing. To check the other thing to do when servicing is to check these capacitors here to make sure that they're okay, and they work hard, and over time they will fail, particularly in a hot environment. The hotter it is, the quicker capacitors fail, basically, and that they are lifed. And in fact, have a quick look at that. This is an ESR meter. Again, we'll look at this in more detail at another time, keeping it fairly light today. what we need is a low reading, which is actually on a graph. Just going to zero, taking into account these prods. I'm just going to zero it. That's it. There's actually here. There's all the readings that you're looking for depending on the value of the capacitor. So along the top here we've got voltage. Down the side here we've got the capacity of the capacitor measured in farads. So in this case, I happen to know those are 2,200 microfarad or 2.2k at 50 volts, which are not on this scale here, but give or take, you're looking for about 0.05 or less. So if I measure, if I can do this without having just dropped the prods, that's it. If I can do this next year, by the way, I'm going to do some videos which if I can get on that. Yeah, I can't really do this one-handed, but take it from me, both those capacitors are okay. But next year I am going to do some videos which I'm going to get a dedicated camera for, rather than trying to use an iPhone, which will go into some of these aspects of amp servicing and how they work, and various other things about amplifiers. From my own experience, because as we all know, there's a lot of rubbish out there on the internet in terms of what you can do to fix amps and change and everything else. There is good information, but there's a whole lot of rubbish as well. And most of the work, or 98% of the work I do, is what I've actually worked out for myself. So, because I don't trust that stuff. So there it is. So what I would do is actually check all of these capacitors just to make sure that they are actually still good. And also things like this, these are components that get very hot. They are dropper resistors in the power supply, and you can see they get hot because I don't know if we can pick this up. Yeah, there it is. You can see the colour of the board there, it's quite brown. That's they're worth resoldering because they tend to desolder themselves and they get dry joints and the amp will stop working. So another one there, look, another big resistor. They're stood off the board so they don't desolder themselves, but they do. These ones actually quite good. These ones here more likely to desolder themselves, but it just depends how hot they get and the quality of the soldering. And modern tin solder is tin solder. That's the small faces, isn't it? We used to play that. So yeah, modern solder is doesn't have lead, and it's not so good. I'm sure we've stored up some problems for ourselves in the future, but I guess it keeps me busy, so I can't complain. So that was that bit. Always very nice when you get the front board out, the preamp board out. This one, well, yeah, the preamp board, because you can clean the front. Very satisfying. That get rid of all the junk that accumulates over time. Looks like new. Things like, as I said, need to clean the fan. It's got very dusty. Change any of these if they've gone high resistance across the contacts at the back. Generally clean it out, get rid of all the junk and the rubbish. After all that's done, put it back together and do a electrical safety test, which is PAT, portable appliance testing, which will just make sure that it's safe to use. Put a nice sticker on the back and stick it in the book to say that it's been done. Put it all back together, do a power test on it. Make sure it's producing a sensible amount of power and the waveform looks good on the oscilloscope, and guitar test, a few other things really. I mean, I haven't told you everything that's done, but then you are pretty much good to go. So this one is work in progress. They've got another one down here. This will be the next one, which is, as you see, it says rehearsal amp 3. So that one's going to be serviced next, which is a Bravo PV Bravo 112, which I don't think I've seen before. So there we go, little insight into amp servicing. So with that, I wish you a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. I will be doing some videos on a dedicated YouTube channel next year, which I hope you'll take a look at. And once again, I thank you for your custom and look forward to keeping you all going with your amps next year. Bye bye now.